I'm Clara, I'm 32, and I never imagined Christmas dinner would be the night my life split in two. The house sparkled, the ham was hot, laughter echoed across a table of 30 people. But then, my dad cleared his throat, the air grew heavy. His voice carried over the chatter, smooth and sharp, as he looked straight at me, raised his glass, smiled, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Clara, your gift is simple. You pay my $85,000 debt or get out. The words fell like ice water over the table. Guests froze with forks halfway to their mouths. My stepmother leaned back, her lips curling into a smirk as she whispered, "Good luck," and my sister's eyes gleamed with a satisfaction I will never forget. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, yet I kept my face calm while inside something cracked wide open. It was not just humiliation. It was betrayal, public and cruel, meant to strip me of dignity. But I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I stood up, walked out, and by sunrise, I cut off every bill they took for granted. What happened next left them begging. But by then, it was too late. I still remember the way the lights shimmered across the front yard that Christmas Eve in St. Paul, Minnesota. My dad had gone overboard with the decorations that year. The whole house sparkled in red and gold, and the giant inflatable Santa on the lawn waved at every passing car. Inside, the smell of roasted ham and cinnamon floated through the rooms, mixing with the laughter of about 20 guests who had gathered for our family dinner. I had put on a deep green dress, the one I always saved for the holidays, and carried a bottle of wine as a small peace offering, because every year there was tension hidden beneath the cheer. My dad was 62. He had retired from the bank 5 years earlier, but he never lost his sharpness or his appetite for control. He stood tall at the head of the dining table, his silver hair slicked back, his grin wide enough to make anyone believe he was the life of the party. My stepmother, Elaine, 59, sat beside him, her red sweater sparkling with sequins, her smile always too tight, as if she were hiding a secret. Across from me sat Vera, my older half-sister, 35, perfectly polished in her black dress. She always had a way of looking at me like I was the child who never grew up, no matter how successful I became in my own life. Dinner moved along like it always did. Guests made small talk about football and travel. Children chased each other through the hallway, and I tried to focus on cutting my slice of ham, pretending this was just another holiday. But I could feel it coming. My dad had a way of building up to a moment, waiting until he had the perfect audience. He loved an audience. When he tapped his glass with his fork, the chatter quieted down. He raised his voice smooth and commanding, and said he had a special announcement. I felt a pit form in my stomach. He was smiling that big banker's grin, the one he used to close deals, the one that never meant anything good for me. He spread his arms and looked straight at me. Everyone's eyes followed. He said tonight's gift was simple. Clara will pay all of my debt, $85,000. Such a small amount and plenty of time to pay in full by New Year's Day. Or she can pack her bags and leave this house for good. For a second, the room was completely still. I could hear the clock on the mantel ticking each second louder than the last. Then came the whispers, the uneasy coughs. A couple of guests laughed nervously, not sure if it was a joke. But his face told them it wasn't. My heart slammed against my ribs. My hands went cold around the knife and fork. I searched the table for anyone who might speak up. No one did. Elaine leaned forward, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. Her voice cut through the silence. Good luck with that. The smirk on her lips burned into my memory. Vera sat back in her chair, crossing her arms, looking as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, like she was proud of him for humiliating me. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, but I refused to give them the tears they wanted. My chest tightened, not just from anger, but from years of swallowing my words, years of covering bills in silence, years of being told I owed them more than I could ever give. That night, in that moment, something inside me cracked open. I realized they had never seen me as a daughter or a sister or even a person. I was a resource, a wallet, a safety net, nothing more. The guests tried to look anywhere but at me, pretending to be interested in the candles, the gravy boat, and their half-filled glasses of wine. The shame pressed down heavily, but so did clarity. I didn't belong there, not anymore. I set down my fork and folded my napkin, smoothing it with deliberate care so my hands would not shake. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping across the hardwood floor louder than I expected, making everyone flinch. I stood up, I didn't say a word. My dad grin faltered just a little, as if he thought maybe I would plead or argue. Elaine tilted her head, waiting for me to break. Vera raised her brows, almost daring me to speak. But I didn't give them anything. Not anger, not sadness, not surrender. Just silence. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking against the polished floor, past the front hallway lined with coats and children's shoes. My pulse hammered in my ears, but my steps were steady. I grabbed my coat from the rack, slipped my arms into the sleeves, and felt the cold Minnesota air rush in as I opened the front door. Behind me, voices started to stir again, low and uneasy, but no one called my name. The night outside was still, snowflakes drifting slowly under the streetlights. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked to my car, my breath visible in the freezing air. My hands trembled only when I touched the cold handle. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and sat there for a moment, staring at the glowing house, hearing faint laughter that already sounded miles away. My chest rose and fell, each breath sharper than the last, until finally it steadied. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine hummed to life. The headlights lit up the driveway, casting long shadows against the snow. I shifted into reverse, glancing one last time at the house that no longer felt like mine. Then I drove away into the winter night, leaving behind the sparkle, the smirks, the demands, and the weight of every unspoken word. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being their gift. I was done being their answer. For the first time in my life, I felt the sharp edge of freedom waiting for me just beyond the silence. The drive back to my apartment in downtown St. Paul felt longer than it really was. The snow on the highway blurred into streaks of white under the headlights, and I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles hurt. My mind kept circling back to that dining table, to the way everyone stared at me as if I were the problem, as if my dad's demand was just another tradition to be accepted. I could still hear Elaine's voice, that sharp little smirk of a sentence. Good luck with that. It replayed in my head like a broken record. When I finally pulled into my building's garage, the clock on the dashboard read close to 1 a.m. I sat there for a moment with the engine running, the heater blasting on my frozen hands before I forced myself to move. The air outside was sharp and bitter as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. My heels clicked on the concrete and echoed, and I felt the weight of silence pressing down. For the first time on Christmas Eve, I was completely alone. Inside, I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and kicked off my shoes. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight through the blinds. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. My chest still felt heavy, but underneath it was something else I had never allowed myself to admit. A deep exhaustion. Years of carrying things I should never have been asked to carry. I remembered when I was 18, full of hope after being accepted into the University of Minnesota. I had won a scholarship, something I had worked for through every sleepless night of high school. I still recall the moment I opened the letter and screamed with joy, only to have the money vanish months later with vague excuses from my dad that the school had lost paperwork. I believed him at the time, but it left me with loans that followed me for years. Then there was the custodial account my mother had started for me when I was a child, one she told me would help me get started after college. She died before she could explain more, and by the time I turned 21, the account was gone. My dad said he had used it for household needs, and Elaine nodded along, never meeting my eyes. I told myself it was for the family, and I buried the disappointment. I thought about the countless bills that showed up in my name, utilities that magically transferred over to my account after I moved back, home for a short while after graduation. Electricity, gas cable, even a phone plan for Vera that I didn't authorize. Each time I discovered them, I convinced myself it was temporary. Each time I paid to avoid arguments. And every time I told myself I was helping my family. Now at 32, I stood in my own apartment, realizing I'd been playing for over a decade. And the worst part was how normal it had felt to them. Like I existed to carry their debt, to clean up their messes, to make their lives easier. I had let them convince me that my role was to give and never to question. I set the empty glass down and walked to my desk. The laptop sat there, dark and waiting. I pressed the power button, and the screen came to life with a low hum. My email inbox flooded the screen, unread messages stacked one after another. Among them was one that made my stomach drop. It was a fraud alert from the bank dated only a few hours earlier, flagged under my name. A new credit card application had been denied, the system detecting inconsistencies in the signature. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I had not applied for any new card. The familiar dread settled in my chest. I clicked open the message, reading line after line until I had no doubt. Someone had used my information again. I leaned back in my chair, running both hands over my face. A wave of nausea hit me. It was Christmas Eve, and instead of thinking about gifts or warmth or family, I was staring at evidence that my identity had been hijacked, probably by the very people who demanded I bail them out just hours earlier. The glow of the screen reflected in the window behind me. I could see my own reflection, tired eyes, messy hair falling loose around my face. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She wasn't the obedient daughter, the reliable sister, the silent provider anymore. She was someone who had finally had enough. And then, as if to confirm what I already suspected, I remembered David's eyes across the table earlier that night. He had looked at me differently, not with cruelty or amusement, but with something that resembled guilt. His gaze had lingered uncertain, almost apologetic, before he dropped it quickly when my dad announced his demand. I closed the email and sat there in the dim light, the hum of the radiator filling the silence. My thoughts shifted from shame to suspicion, and then to something sharper. A quiet determination began to form, stronger than fear, stronger than humiliation. For the first time in years, I was not going to ignore the signs. The snow outside kept falling, blanketing the streets in white, but inside my chest something else stirred, a clarity I had never allowed myself to feel. Something was breaking open and I could feel it in my bones. The weight of all those years was still there, but now it was shifting. I shut the laptop and sat still, my mind racing, my heart steadying. I did not have answers yet, but I had a direction. And that was enough for tonight. The glow from my laptop lit up the entire living room as I sat down again, after pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor. My body was exhausted, but my mind was sharp, restless, unwilling to let go. I opened my online banking account, and the numbers staring back at me told the story I had tried to ignore for too long. Monthly withdrawals I did not authorize, charges that clearly belonged to my dad's household payments for cable, water, and even a landline phone that I had not used in years. My fingers shook as I scrolled through statement after statement, the dates stretching back further than I wanted to admit. Every month I had been quietly covering their expenses without realizing the extent of it. The fraud alert I received earlier was not an accident. It was just the newest page in a thick book of deceit. I opened a new folder on my desktop and typed the words, Debt Revenge 2021. The name felt heavy but necessary. I started downloading every statement I could, dragging them into the folder one by one. The clink of the files stacking up almost gave me a rhythm to follow. I needed an order. I needed proof. The apartment was silent, except for the low hum of the radiator and the occasional pop from the pipes. I dialed the bank's customer service line and pressed the numbers through the automated menu until I reached a human voice. The young man on the other end introduced himself politely, asking how he could help. My throat tightened as I explained that fraudulent charges had been made in my name and I needed my account secured immediately. He asked for verification, then confirmed that multiple credit inquiries had been attempted under my social security number. My stomach dropped, but I stayed calm. I requested every card frozen, every account monitored, every possible alert activated. He promised he would flag my account and send documents for me to fill out. When I hung up, I leaned back in my chair and let the reality sink in. My own dad and his wife were not just demanding money from me. They had been using me all along, quietly, secretly, stealing pieces of my financial security while smiling across dinner tables. I turned next to the utilities. One by one, I pulled up logins I barely remembered creating. Xcel Energy, Comcast, the city water department, insurance. Even Netflix, which I had not watched in months. Every single one of them linked back to my credit card. With each phone call, I felt the same rehearsed words tumble out. I need to cancel the automatic payments. I need to remove my name from this account. I need confirmation in writing. Some customer service agents were surprised, others indifferent. I kept my tone steady, polite, but firm. When I finished the last call, it was almost 3 a.m. My apartment was filled with the sound of email notifications pinging in quick succession. Confirmations of cancellations, notices of account closures, evidence piling up in the folder I had named hours earlier. I poured myself another glass of water and stood by the window, looking out over the quiet street below. Snow had covered every car, every sidewalk, softening the sharp edges of the world, but inside me there was nothing soft, only a growing steel that had been forged in years of silence. My phone buzzed against the desk. I glanced at the screen and saw my dad's name flashing. I let it ring. Moments later, another call came in. Elaine, I silenced it. Then came the voicemails. I pressed play and his voice filled the room, deeper now, edged with frustration. Clara, answer me. You cannot just leave like that. Do not embarrass the family. You know this is your responsibility. The message is cut off with a click. The next one was Elaine, her tone sharper, higher. You think you are making a point, but you are making a fool of yourself. You will regret this. We all will. I saved both messages into the folder without hesitation. Evidence. Proof of pressure of manipulation. By the time the clock pushed toward 4, my body sagged under the weight of exhaustion, but my mind would not let me rest. I pulled out a yellow notepad and began scribbling names of every account I could remember, every possible tie they had to me. If I missed one, they would keep talking. I pressed harder into the paper until the pen nearly tore through the page. When I set the pen down, my hand was cramped, but my chest felt lighter. I had taken back something tonight. Maybe not everything, not yet, but enough to know the balance was shifting. The phone buzzed again, lighting up the room with its glow. I watched it vibrate across the desk, but I did not move to pick it up. My dad's name stared back at me, insistent, demanding, but I let it pass into silence. The hum of the radiator filled the space again, steady and warm, and I closed my eyes just long enough to feel the tension release from my shoulders. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the foundation of everything I had allowed was starting to crack. I knew morning would bring more calls, more messages, maybe even knocks at my door. But I also knew I would not answer. Not yet. Tonight was the first time I had fought back, and that was enough to keep me sitting upright, waiting for whatever came next. The buzzing woke me before the alarm ever had a chance. At first, I thought it was just another snowplow rumbling down the street, but then I realized it was my phone vibrating again and again on the nightstand. The red glow of the clock read 5 in the morning. My eyes stung from barely 2 hours of sleep, but I reached for the phone anyway. The screen glared back at me, filled with missed calls. 47 of them, all from the night before. My dad, Elaine, even Vera. My thumb hovered for a moment, then dropped away. I let the phone keep buzzing, the vibration rattling against the wood like a warning I refused to answer. A voicemail notification blinked. I pressed play, holding the phone a few inches from my ear. My father's voice was not smooth anymore. It was ragged, angry, but threaded with panic. "Clara, what have you done? The power is off, the internet is gone. You know we cannot live like this. Fix it now. Come back here and stop this nonsense." I sat there in the half-dark, the radiator clicking in the corner, and listened to the man who once called me his daughter, but treated me like an ATM. His authority sounded smaller, now cracked and uneven. I saved the message. Evidence. Another voicemail rolled in right after. Elaine, this time her voice shrill and desperate. "Enough of this game. Do you want us to freeze to death? The neighbors will notice. Everyone will know you are cruel. Stop it and turn everything back on." The message ended with a shaky breath. I saved that one too, dropping it into the growing folder. My phone buzzed again, the sound grating against my ears. I silenced it, placed it face down, and walked barefoot across the cold floor to the kitchen. The linoleum sent a chill up my legs, but the warmth of the coffee maker comforted me. I poured a cup, the steam curling into the quiet as I leaned against the counter. For the first time in years, their chaos was no longer mine to clean up. The snow outside was still falling, muffling the world into a kind of hush. I carried my mug back to the desk, opened the folder labeled Debt Revenge 2021, and dropped the new voicemails into it. The glow of the screen steadied me. My heart was beating slower now, almost in rhythm with the hum of the heater. The phone buzzed again. This time I picked it up, typed one simple text, and hit send. Already too late. I set the phone down and folded my hands in my lap. The silence filled the room again, broken only by the faint sounds of a city waking up outside. Plows scraping the streets, a car door slamming, footsteps crunching in the snow. When I finally glanced back at the phone, the screen showed more missed calls stacking up. 10 more. 15. By the time the sun began to rise, the count had passed 60. But I didn't listen. I already knew what they would say, the panic turning sharper, the pleas becoming threats and then circling back to panic again. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The snow was painted pale gold now, catching the first light of the morning. A couple walked their dog down the street, bundled in heavy coats, their breaths visible in the frozen air. The normalcy of it struck me. Out there, life went on. Inside in the house I had left behind, the world was unraveling. My coffee had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. The bitterness steadied me. I thought about the folder on my computer, now heavy with saved messages, each one proof of who they were when the mask slipped. It wasn't cruelty keeping me from answering. It was clear. Another voicemail came through as I stood there. I didn't press play, but I watched the transcript flash across the screen. Vera this time. Her words dripped with blame. "This is all your fault. You're destroying us. Do you even care about your family?" I turned the screen off. Yes, I cared about my family. Just not the kind that fed off lies and manipulation. I sat back down, opened a notebook, and wrote down the time of every missed call, every message. 47 by dawn, 60 by sunrise. Evidence lined up in neat rows of ink. My hand cramped, but I didn't stop. The radiator clicked again, louder this time, and I looked around the small apartment that had become my safe haven. Modest, quiet, warm enough. A place no one could touch unless I let them in. I leaned back in my chair, listening as the city outside grew louder. Buses rumbled down the avenue. Children's voices echoed faintly as they trudged through snow towards school. Morning moved on without me, without them, and that was the point. I closed the notebook, set it carefully on top of the folder, and let my eyes linger on the neat stack. For years I had carried their mess inside me like a weight. Now it was outside, documented, stored, no longer mine to carry. The sun inched higher, casting sharper light through the window. I sat there watching it spread across the glass, waiting for whatever came next, steady in the silence I had finally claimed as my own. By mid-morning, the snow had slowed, leaving a pale gray sky that pressed low over the city. I wrapped myself in a heavy sweater and tried to focus on the quiet rhythm of my own apartment. For a few hours, I answered work emails and made coffee, pretending that life was moving forward as if nothing had happened. But inside my stomach churned with the weight of unfinished business. It was just after noon when my phone buzzed with a new message. This time it was not from my dad or Elaine. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. David, my younger half-brother. We had not spoken more than a few polite words at the Christmas party before everything unraveled. His text was short. I need to see you. Please, it is important. I stared at the words, debating whether to ignore them. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, but another part remembered the guilt in his eyes last night when my dad made his announcement. After a long pause, I typed back, "Meet me at Nina's Cafe on Grand Avenue, 2:00. The light through the cafe window was soft, a pale winter glow that made the steam from my coffee look like fog on a little lake. I sat there for a long minute, stirring sugar into my cup more out of habit than hunger, watching people come and go on Grand Avenue. The bell above the door jingled, and for a moment I thought it might be someone ordinary. But then David ducked his head and slid into the booth opposite me, the wool cap pulled low, his cheeks pink from the cold. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner in the face, the jaw that used to be boyish now set with an awkward seriousness. When he put the flash drive on the table, it felt almost ordinary, like passing a salt shaker, but the weight of it was anything but. I watched his fingers go back and forth across the plastic, as if he could push the courage into it. I did not ask to hear what he had. He told me with the same quiet rush he had used the night before, words coming out in a tumble. He said he had been looking through some old files in Dad's study, things he had not meant to find, and that what he saw made him sick. He said Vera joked about how easy it was to move things into my name because I was safe, because I would not ask questions. He said he had watched transfers from the custodial account into my dad's personal account, and that there were records of credit card applications with my social security number on them. He said he had copies, scanned application statements, even a bank memo with handwritten notes about moving balances onto my cards. My mouth must have gone dry. For so long I had suspected a shadow at the edge of my certainty. But looking at David across from me, seeing how badly it hurt him to admit it, made the reality sharp and real. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I gave him what I could, which was my attention and steadiness. Tell me everything, I said, and he did. He told me about dates and numbers, about a pattern that stretched back years. The credit card application started as early as 2015, he said, and continued off and on through 2019. The custodial account, which Mom had opened when I was a child, showed withdrawals in small amounts that had become larger over time, funneled into home repairs and vacations. There was even a memo from a bank employee who had been told to apply charges to my name because it was simpler for the household bookkeeping. He slid the flash drive closer to me, the plastic catching the light. He said he had copied everything onto it and hid the original folder on a jumped drive so no one could erase it. He confessed that he had been part of some of it, that he had signed a piece of paper once or twice when he was younger, thinking it was okay because Dad said it was necessary. He said he regretted it, that the guilt had eaten at him until he could not stand it anymore. My first impulse was anger so hot it made the edges of my vision blur. How could he? I wanted to shout. How could any of you take what was not yours and call it family? But I did not shout. Instead, I reached out and took the flash drive in my hand and felt the tiny ridge where the plastic had been pressed. I felt the history there, every lie and every small theft baked into those files. We talked for a long while after that. We sat with half-finished lattes and paper napkins smeared with sugar, and he told me small things that filled in the story. How Vera had learned quick accounting tricks at college that she used on the household ledgers. How Elaine had handled phone calls with vendors and sometimes redirected them to the bills listed under my name. How Dad had learned to smooth over the awkward moments with a laugh and a pat on the shoulder, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Every little anecdote tightened the weave into a net that had trapped me. At one point, a woman at the next table dropped her wallet and David bent to pick it up, his hand brushing mine. He looked genuinely embarrassed, like a child who had been caught with a hand in the cookie jar. I squeezed his hand for a second, not in forgiveness, but in recognition that people make terrible choices, and sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who hurt you, indirectly because they are tangled up in their own needs. When he told me how the files were organized, I could picture the folders, the scanned PDFs with dates stamped across the top, the spreadsheets with numbers that made no sense unless someone explained what they had been moved for. He described a bank statement where a transfer of $1,000 was listed for home maintenance, then another for a niece's tuition, and then a series of payments to a credit card that had been opened in my name. My jaw tightened until it ached. We made a plan in that booth, not because either of us wanted theatrics, but because practical steps felt like breathing after being underwater. He would keep copies of everything in 2 places, and he would not tell anyone else. I would back up the files and start organizing the evidence into categories. We agreed on a signal if I ever needed him to come pick up something or to show up at the house unannounced. He asked if I wanted him to confront them, and I told him no, not now. Confrontation could erase the one advantage we had, which was surprise and documentation. I needed time to turn chaos into a case. Before we left, David reached across the table and said something that made me look at him straight. He said he had always looked up to me in little ways, like the way I managed my life, and that seeing me leave the table the night before had broken something loose inside him. He said he wanted to try to do the right thing even if it meant losing the comforts the family had always assumed were his too. I wanted to tell him that this was not something a child could fix, that the damage had been done for years, but I only nodded and asked him to be careful. Walking out into the late afternoon, the city had that washed clean look after a snowfall. Shop windows twinkled with post-holiday sales, and a man walked by pushing a stroller with a blanket pulled up to its rim. People passed with scarves over their mouths, their breath hanging white in the air. My own breath fogged and then cleared, and the weight in my purse felt heavier than cash or keys. It was proof and a promise at once. On the drive back, I kept glancing at the flash drive, thinking of the possibilities. There was a legal path, yes, but also a wider social one. If this went public, there would be gossip, yes, and pain, but also accountability. I remembered conversations I had seen on forums where people wrote about being invisible in their own families, and the way strangers on the internet had rallied around one another with advice and empathy. My story, ugly and private as it was, could change more than the outcome of one household. When I pulled into my apartment building, I sat in the car for a moment, feeling the engine tick as it cooled. I placed the purse on the passenger seat and ran a hand over my face. My eyes were swollen from lack of sleep and maybe from the uncried tears I had held back since the night before. I told myself to breathe, to move forward one step at a time. I told myself to not let fear be the loudest voice in the room. That evening, I did not go straight to the laptop as I might have before. Instead, I boiled water and made a proper meal, something warm and deliberate. Small acts of care that felt necessary when everything else was unmoored. I called Nancy, my friend from work, and told her I needed to vent without giving details. She came over with a pie and a worried face, and we ate and talked about anything but my family. It was medicinal, that simple normalcy. Later, when the dishes were done and the apartment settled into a hush, I pulled out the flash drive and my laptop. I set up a new folder and began dragging files into it, naming each one carefully. Fraud, custodial account, credit applications, utility transfers. As I worked, the narrative of my life rearranged itself, the loose threads pulled into place. There were moments of disbelief written in the margins of the statements, like notes from a detective who could not quite believe his own findings. I made copies and password protected them, then made another encrypted backup and hid it on a secondary drive. There were numbers in those files that made me sick. One entry showed a transfer in 2012 that matched the year Mom had been ill. Another entry was a credit card opened in 2018 with a purchase at a home improvement store the same week Vera had announced a remodel. Line after line made the picture clearer, and with each confirmation I felt less like a victim and more like a person assembling the evidence to tell the truth. At 3 a.m, I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, my hand resting on the flash drive in my palm. I thought about the small kid who used to braid David's hair into uneven pigtails and how we had once shared secrets over a fence. I thought about my mother and the letter she had left me, the one about freedom and choosing courage. The images swelled, and for a while I let the grief in. Then I set the grief aside and stood up, placing the flash drive into a small tin box I had found in an old drawer and locking it with a tiny key. It felt ritualistic in a way, a private act of safeguarding something precious. I slid the tin into the back of my closet behind a row of sweaters, then lay down on my bed with the window slightly cracked to let in the cold, thinking of the weeks ahead. There would be phone calls and forms and maybe a lawyer, and there would be hurt and outrage, but there would also be the chance to be seen for who I was, not who they had said I was. When sleep finally came, it was thin and uneasily stacked with plans. I dreamed of a house with all the lights on and a crowd in the front yard, watching as the truth walked out the door. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth and the certainty that the work I had started with David would not be stopped by threats or tears. The line had been crossed, and now it was my turn to write what came next. The apartment felt colder that night, though the heat was running. I lit a candle on this desk beside me and watched the flame sway, while I plugged the flash drive David had given me into my laptop. My pulse quickened as the files loaded one by one, each document revealing more of the truth I had suspected but never been able to prove. Statements with my name printed across the top, signatures that looked almost like mine but just off enough, transfers from accounts I had once believed were locked in my favor. The more I clicked, the tighter my chest grew. There was the college fund my mother started drained in pieces over the years, line after line showing deposits into my dad's personal accounts. There were utility bills tied to my credit card even after I had moved out, and there were records of loans with my social security number attached, loans I never signed for. My eyes burned as I leaned back in the chair, the glow of the screen harsh against the dark room. I pressed my hands over my face, trying to slow the rush of anger and betrayal. Then, beneath one file, I found something I had not expected. A scanned letter, old and slightly blurred. The handwriting was my mother's. I clicked it open, my breath catching as her words filled the screen. She had written it years ago before she died, and it was addressed to me. She wrote about the fund she had set aside, how it was meant to give me freedom, how she hoped it would help me build the life she always wanted for me. She had written about trusting me, about knowing I would choose well, about love that stretched beyond her own life. Tears blurred my vision until I could hardly read. My throat ached as I whispered her name into the empty room. She had trusted me, and instead her gift had been stolen, twisted into a chain around my neck by the very man who was supposed to protect me. I closed the file and sat still for a long moment, letting the words sink into me. The grief was sharp, but beneath it something stronger began to take shape. This was no longer just about money or manipulation. This was about my mother's memory, about honoring what she had tried to give me, about reclaiming the piece of her they had stolen. The candle flickered beside me, its flame steadying as if it shared my resolve. I wiped my cheeks and leaned forward, pulling the laptop closer. My hands no longer trembled. I began organizing the files into folders, labeling them with precision. Fraud, utilities, loans, mother's letter. Each one felt like a stone stacked into a wall, a barrier between who I had been and who I was becoming. The phone buzzed on the desk, another call from my dad. I let it ring out. Then Elaine, then Vera. I turned the phone face down and returned to the screen. Their voices had no place here anymore. By the time midnight passed, the candle had burned low, leaving wax pooled at its base. My eyes were tired, but my mind was sharp. I saved everything onto 2 separate flash drives, tucking one into a drawer and slipping the other into my purse. I shut the laptop and sat back, the room now quiet except for the hum of the heater. The air felt different, heavier, but also cleaner, as if something had shifted permanently. I glanced at the clock. The new year was only days away, my dad's deadline, his ultimatum. But I was no longer the daughter who folded under pressure, no longer the silent provider who carried their burdens. I rose from the chair, blew out the candle, and stood in the dark, with the faint smell of smoke curling around me. I felt the weight of my mother's words still resting on my chest, guiding me forward. At that moment, I knew I would not run, I would not beg, I would not bend. Whatever came next, I was ready. The snow had turned to a fine drizzle of ice the morning I walked into the law office on Summit Avenue. The brass handle was cold in my grip as I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. The warmth of the lobby wrapped around me, smelling faintly of leather and coffee. My boots squeaked on the polished floor as I made my way to the receptionist's desk, clutching my purse tighter than usual. I had spoken with Tom Hensley on the phone the night before, a lawyer recommended quietly by a coworker who had gone through her own family nightmare. He specialized in financial fraud and estate disputes, the very world I had found myself dragged into without consent. When his assistant appeared and guided me back to his office, my throat felt tight. Tom was in his early 40s tall, with a calm presence that filled the room without effort. He shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. His office was lined with shelves of thick books and framed certificates, but his desk was clean organized as if he was ready for battle at any moment. I set my purse on my lap and pulled out the flash drive. My voice was steadier than I expected. This has everything. Years of statements, fraudulent accounts, forged signatures. Even a letter from my mother. He nodded, sliding the drive into his laptop. His fingers tapped the keyboard as file after file opened on the screen. Between us, I watched his brow furrow as he scrolled, his mouth tightening at the edges. After several minutes, he leaned back and folded his hands. Clara, he said, this is not just theft. This is a pattern of fraud. And because some of these accounts involve your social security number, it crosses into federal territory. The words landed heavy, but they also lit something inside me. For years, I had been made to feel powerless, and now sitting in that office, I felt the first flicker of power return. What do we do? I asked, my voice low. First, he replied, we will secure your identity. Freeze your credit file, the official fraud alerts. Next, we prepare a civil case for damages. And depending on what the investigators find, this could move into criminal court. My chest rose and fell as I tried to steady my breath. He studied me, his gaze steady. You need to understand, once we begin, there is no turning back. This will not just expose them, it will destroy them. I thought of my dad's booming voice at the dinner table, of Elaine's smirk, of Vera's folded arms. I thought of my mother's letter, her handwriting curling across the page, her hope for me to be free. My answer was simple, then let it. Tom nodded once, decisive, and began printing forms. The sound of the machine filled the quiet room as he placed documents before me, explaining each one. I signed where he pointed, my pen pressing hard enough to leave indents on the paper beneath. Each signature felt like a piece of armor sliding into place. By the time I left, the drizzle had turned into sleet. I pulled my coat tighter around me, my steps crunching against the salted sidewalk. The folder of copies was heavy in my purse, but it was a weight I welcomed. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from my dad. His voice trembled now, no longer commanding, but pleading. Clara, please. We can fix this as a family. Do not do something you will regret. I saved it without listening to the rest. The glow of the screen reflected my own face in the car window, pale but resolute. The old fear was still there, coiled tight in my stomach, but it no longer controlled me. I started the engine and sat for a moment, watching the sleet blur the windshield. The city lights shimmered through the ice, distorted but still shining. My breath fogged the glass as I whispered softly to myself, it has already begun. I shifted into drive, the tires crunching against the frozen pavement, carrying me forward into a storm I no longer intended to avoid. The call came on a gray Thursday afternoon. I had just returned from work, kicking off my boots by the door, when the phone lit up with my dad's name. For a moment, I considered ignoring it like I had so many times before, but something in me wanted to hear his voice this time. I slid my thumb across the screen and answered. Clara, he began, his tone softer than I had heard in years. We need to talk. Please come by the house. For a moment, I almost laughed. The same house where he had humiliated me, where Elaine had smirked as if she had won. My pulse quickened, but I agreed. Fine, I will stop by. My voice was flat, giving nothing away. When I pulled into the driveway later that evening, the yard still shimmered with Christmas decorations, though some lights had gone dark. The inflatable Santa leaned to one side, half deflated, as if even he had given up. I walked slowly up the front steps, my breath visible in the cold air. The door opened before I could knock. Elaine stood there in a cardigan, her hair neat, her smile forced. Clara, thank you for coming, she said, stepping aside. I brushed past her without responding. Inside, my dad sat in his usual chair near the fireplace. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale, the booming presence he once carried now strangely small. Vera stood near the mantel, arms crossed, eyes sharp. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and tension. Clara, my dad said, gesturing toward the couch. Sit, please. I remained standing. What do you want? He ran a hand through his thinning hair, his voice strained. I made a mistake. We made mistakes, but you cannot do this to us. You cannot drag the family name through the mud. Elaine perched on the arm of his chair, her tone sharp but coated with false sweetness. Whatever you think you have, it is not worth ruining your own future. We can fix this together as a family. My chest tightened, but my voice came out steady. I am not ruining anything. You did that when you stole from me, when you signed my name, when you drained what Mom left. Vera shifted, her lips curling. Always playing the victim, aren't you, Clara? Always making it about you. I turned to her, meeting her gaze without flinching. You think this is about money. It is about respect, about trust, about the years you all took from me as if I was nothing but a bank account. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. My dad's eyes darted between us, his face reddening. Clara, listen to me. You will regret this. The courts, the lawyers, the publicity. You cannot win against your own family. I stepped closer, my hands clenched at my sides. I already have. Elaine's smile faltered, her nails digging into the fabric of my dad's chair. What do you mean? I leaned down slightly, my voice low but clear. I have proof. Every account, every forged signature, every bill you forced onto me. And I'm not afraid to use it. For a moment, no one moved. Then my dad slammed his fist against the arm of the chair, the sound echoing through the room. His voice cracked as he shouted, "You ungrateful child. After everything I have done." I felt the sting of tears in my eyes but held them back. I straightened, smoothing my coat with deliberate calm. I am not your child anymore. Not in the way you think. I turned toward the door, my steps slow but certain. Behind me, Elaine's voice rose shrill and desperate. You will destroy us, Clara. Do you understand that I paused with my hand on the doorknob, glancing back one last time? No, I said softly. You destroyed yourselves. The cold air rushed in as I stepped outside, the night swallowing me whole. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked to my car, each breath sharp in my lungs. The house behind me still glowed with flickering lights, but to me it looked hollow, brittle, ready to collapse under the weight of its own lies. I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, my heart pounding but steady. The confrontation had ended, but the real battle was only beginning. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the dark, and drove away without looking back. The first sign that things were shifting came a week later when I opened my email over morning coffee. There was a message from the bank's fraud department with the subject line, "Account activity escalated." My stomach nodded as I clicked. The message explained that multiple accounts tied to my name had been frozen and were now under review. It also noted that because of the scale and pattern, the case had been referred to federal investigators. I set my mug down carefully, afraid my shaking hands would spill it. This was it. The quiet storm I had been gathering was no longer mine alone. Others had stepped in, people with the authority to dismantle what my dad and Elaine had built from lies. By noon, the phone calls began. This time it was not only my dad and Elaine, it was Vera, her voice tight and furious on voicemail. You went too far, Clara. Do you realize what you have done? The bank is questioning everything. Dad's accounts are locked. We cannot even pay the mortgage. I hope you are proud. I listened, saved the message, and pressed delete from my screen. Later that day, David texted, "They are panicking." Cops came by the house asking questions. Elaine was screaming at Dad in the driveway. Neighbors were watching. I typed back only 2 words. I know. The news spread quickly through town. St. Paul was not large enough to keep something like this hidden. At work, coworkers glanced at me differently, as if they had caught wind of the drama but did not know how to ask. I kept my head down, focusing on the numbers in front of me, letting their whispers slide off my back. For once, I was not ashamed. That evening, as I cooked a simple dinner in my small kitchen, my phone lit up again. It was my dad this time, and against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was frantic, uneven. Clara, they froze everything. Do you understand? I cannot access the retirement accounts. We cannot even use the credit cards. You have to fix this. You have to call them and say it was a mistake. I gripped the phone tighter, the spatula still in my other hand. No, I said firmly, I do not have to fix anything. You did this. There was silence, then a desperate edge in his tone. We will lose the house. Elaine is threatening to leave. Vera refuses to help. Is that what you want? I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. I want the truth to matter. I want what Mom left me back. I want my life to stop being collateral for your mistakes. His voice broke, then a sound I had never heard from him before. Clara, please. I ended the call without another word. My hands trembled as I set the phone on the counter, but my chest felt steady. For the first time, he was the one begging, and I was the one holding the line. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. Legal documents, notices from the bank, updates from Tom. Each page outlined the fallout in careful language. Accounts under investigation. Assets temporarily seized. Fraudulent activity confirmed. Reading them felt surreal, like watching a play where the actors bore my family's faces. I stacked the papers neatly on my desk, slid them into a folder, and sat back. Outside, children played in the snow, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Life went on ordinary and simple, while mine had turned into a battlefield of signatures and statements. That night, David called. His voice was low, heavy with guilt. They are blaming me too, Clara. They think I helped you. Elaine threw my things on the porch. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. "You did help me," I said softly, "and I'm grateful, but I am sorry you are caught in the fire." He gave a bitter laugh. "Maybe it is what I deserve." I stayed quiet too long. I wanted to tell him it was not his fault that he was a victim too, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I promised we would meet soon, that I would not let him be alone in this. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the small lamp on the desk. The folder of documents lay beside me, solid and undeniable. The walls of the house my dad and Elaine had built on lies were crumbling, piece by piece. And though I felt the ache of grief deep in my chest, I also felt something else rising steady and unshakable. The balance of power had shifted, and there was no going back. The balance of power had shifted, and there was no going back. Days blurred into one another as January deepened, each morning bringing another email from Tom or a notice from the bank. Investigators had seized more accounts, and whispers spread quickly through our small community. At the grocery store, I caught neighbors glancing at me, then away, their expressions tight with curiosity. I held my head high, pushing my cart slowly down the aisles, refusing to shrink the way I once would have. One evening, just as I was settling down with a book, a sharp knock rattled my door. My chest tightened. I set the book aside and opened the door to find my dad standing there, his face pale against the cold. He looked older than I had ever seen him. His shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, his voice raw, "Clara, we need to talk." I hesitated, then stepped back. He walked inside slowly, glancing around my modest apartment as if he could not believe this was the place I had chosen over his house. He sat at the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together. "You are really going through with this," he whispered. "You are really going to ruin us." I stayed standing, my arms crossed. "No, Dad, I am not ruining anything. I am finally telling the truth." His jaw tightened. "Do you know what this means? We could lose everything. The house, the retirement. People we know will hear about this." I thought of Mom's letter, the way her handwriting curled with love, the way she had wanted me to be free. My voice broke but held steady. "You already lost me a long time ago when you decided money mattered more than your own daughter." His face twisted, part anger, part shame. For a moment I thought he might shout, but instead his eyes filled with tears. He lowered his head into his hands. I turned toward the window, staring at the snow that glittered under the streetlight. The silence stretched until finally he rose. He looked at me one last time, his voice small. "You will regret this, Clara." I met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "No, I will not." When he left, the air felt lighter, though my chest ached with the weight of finality. That was the last time he ever stood in my apartment. Weeks passed. The investigation deepened. Elaine tried calling again, her voice sharp in voicemails that I deleted without listening. Vera's messages grew shorter, colder, until they stopped altogether. David kept in touch, updating me on the chaos unraveling in the house. He said, Elaine screamed daily. Vera blamed everyone but herself, and my dad drifted through rooms like a ghost. One Saturday morning, Tom called with news. The investigators had enough evidence. Charges were being prepared. He spoke carefully, explaining the process, the hearings, the steps ahead. I sat at my desk, the sun warming my shoulders through the window, and felt both relief and sorrow settle deep inside me. That night, I lit another candle and read Mom's letter again. I let her words steady me, let her love remind me that even in loss there was something worth holding on to. By spring, the house on Summit Avenue went up for sale. The sign out front leaned slightly in the thawing ground, a silent marker of an empire crumbling. I drove past it once just to see. The windows were dark, the lawn unkempt, the sparkle of Christmas long gone. I did not stop. I kept driving past familiar streets, past the places where memories lingered. My life was no longer tied to that house, or to the weight of debts that were never mine. At home, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at my desk, opening a blank document. I began to write my own story in my own words, no longer silenced, no longer afraid. And as I wrote, I thought of all the women like me who had been told to carry more than their share, who had been made to believe they owed everything and deserved nothing. I wanted them to know they were not alone. If you have ever carried the weight of family betrayal, if you have ever had to choose between silence and survival, I want to hear your story. Share it with me. Tell me what you would have done, what you think I should have done differently. And if you want more stories like mine, filled with lessons with justice, with the strength it takes to walk away, then stay with me here. Your thoughts, your voices, they matter more than you know.